My father called me damaged goods in front of the man he was selling me to. He said it the way you describe a horse with a bad leg, factual, apologetic, adjusting the price accordingly. You understand the situation. The physicians confirmed it 6 years ago. She cannot bear children. A pause. The small, precise sound of a cuff being straightened. Damaged goods, I am afraid. But the debt is what it is, and she is what I have. He did not look at me when he said it. He had stopped looking at me years ago. The dress was gray, serviceable, mended at the left cuff with thread that almost matched, close enough that you would not notice unless you were looking, and no one in this room was looking at the cuff. No one in this room was looking at me. The gray dress was the dress of a daughter whose appearance was no longer an investment, chosen the way you choose a container for something to intend to hand off, functional, forgettable, adequate to the purpose. I sat by the window. The solicitor was gray-haired, with documents spread across the table between himself and my father, and they spoke in the measured cadence of men who understand that sentiment is inefficient. My father's voice was his account's voice. I knew it well. I had heard it applied to unprofitable livestock, to the East Field after the third bad harvest, to my sister's dowry negotiations when the first offer came in low. It was not a cruel voice. That was the thing about my father. He was not cruel by temperament. He was cruel by arithmetic, which is worse because arithmetic does not feel guilty afterward. I looked at the November light on the glass. My hands were in my lap. They were steady. I had trained them to be steady the way you train anything through repetition and correction and the understanding that the alternative draws attention you cannot afford. When I was 17 and the family physician delivered his verdict, my hands had shaken for 3 days. By the 4th day, I had understood that shaking changed nothing and cost everything, and I had stopped. 6 years of practice. 6 years of sitting in rooms where I was discussed and not consulted, present and uncounted, and my hands had learned the lesson my mind had taken longer to accept. The word damaged sat in the air of my father's drawing room like furniture no one bothered to move. I looked at the light. I held very still. I waited for the transaction to complete. The voice came from the doorway. Not the solicitor. Not my father. A voice that was cold the way stone is cold. Not aggressive. Not unkind. Simply the temperature of something that has existed longer than warmth. I heard 2 words. 2. The drawing room went silent in the specific, total way that rooms go silent when something enters them that the room was not built to contain. My father turned. The solicitor turned. Papers shifted on the table. A candle on the mantelpiece leaned. Not from a draft. There was no draft. Leaned the way a candle leans when the air around it has changed its allegiance. I did not turn. Not immediately. I felt the cold first. It came ahead of him, the way a storm's pressure drops before the rain arrives. A specific, ancient cold that had nothing to do with the November outside the glass. It moved through the room like intention. Then the shadows shifted along the wainscoting, thickening at the edges, pooling in the corners with a weight that shadows should not have. Then the candle leaned again. Then I turned. The vampire king was standing in the doorway of my father's drawing room. He had not been announced. He was not expected. He was dressed in black, the absolute, uncomplicating black of something that does not require the room's approval. And he was still in the manner of things that are never still by accident. His amber eyes were not on my father. They were not on the solicitor or the documents or the debt that had brought us all to this particular November afternoon. They were on me, on the gray dress, on the mended cuff, on the steady hands in my lap, on the face that had not moved since my father had said the word. He crossed the room. My father stepped back. The solicitor stood. The cold followed Soren Vane like weather follows a change in the season. Not rushing, not threatening, simply arriving. Because it had always been going to arrive, and the room had simply not known it yet. He moved without sound. That was the thing you noticed second, after the cold and the amber eyes, that a man of his size crossing a room with that kind of purpose made no sound at all. No vampire I had ever heard described moved the way rumor said they moved, and yet here was the evidence of it, crossing my father's drawing room in absolute silence and stopping in front of me. I looked up. The amber eyes were close. 3 feet. Less. They were not dull. They were not flat. They were not the assessing calm of a man evaluating a transaction. They were burning, present and ancient and furious, in the way that only very controlled things are furious. The fury of something that has chosen precision over destruction and is making that choice again, right now, in front of me, with considerable effort. He extended his hand, palm up, open. The gesture of a choice offered, not a command issued. Miss Wren. His voice was quiet. It carried the way cold carries, through walls, through composure, through 6 years of careful and necessary stillness. Your father has described you as damaged goods. I have heard him. The amber eyes did not move from my face. I disagree. He did not look at my father. He did not raise his voice. There was no performance in it, no theater. Only the flat, certain weight of a statement made by something that has not been wrong about a thing in several centuries and does not intend to begin now. I am here to offer you a position at the Vane estate, not as payment for a debt. A pause. As my wife. My father made a sound. The solicitor made a sound. I made no sound. I looked at the open hand. I looked at the amber eyes. I looked at the drawing room. My father's drawing room. The room where I had been evaluated and diminished and quietly, efficiently reduced for 6 years. The room where the word damaged had lived in the air like furniture no one bothered to move. My fingers were shaking when I lifted my hand. 6 years of training, and they shook anyway. His hand was cold, steady, certain in the way that only very old things are certain, not because they have never doubted, but because they have outlived every doubt they ever had. My father's voice came from somewhere behind me. She cannot give you an heir. Soren did not look at him. He looked at me. Only at me. As though my father's drawing room and my father's arithmetic and my father's 6 years of careful, clinical diminishment had already ceased to be relevant, had already been filed, assessed, and found insufficient. I know, he said. 2 words. The same 2 words as the doorway, but different now. Everything was different now. The carriage left before I had finished climbing the front steps. I heard the wheels on the gravel, the specific, diminishing sound of a vehicle whose driver had been instructed not to wait, and I did not turn to watch it go. There was nothing behind me worth watching. There was only the Vane estate ahead, and the cold, and the enormous dark door that was already opening before I reached it. Mrs. Harrow was not what I expected. I had expected a housekeeper's uniform, a housekeeper's careful neutrality, the specific professional blankness of a woman who had to manage a house and not to have opinions about its occupants. What I got was a woman of 60 with iron-gray hair and eyes the color of old pewter, who looked at me the way a surveyor looks at a property, methodically, without flattery, starting at the top and working down. She reached the gray dress. She reached the mended cuff. She stopped. "That," she said, "will not do." Not unkind. Factual. The voice of a woman who has standards and has decided, in this moment, to apply them. She turned before I could answer and walked into the house, and the understanding was clear. I was to follow. I followed. The entrance hall was vast and dark-paneled and cold in the way that large stone houses are cold. Not the supernatural cold that had moved through my father's drawing room ahead of Soren Vane, but the ordinary cold of rooms that have not been warm in a long time. Gas lamps burned low along the walls, throwing amber light across portraits I did not yet know the names of. Mrs. Harrow moved through it all without looking at any of it. The walk of a woman who has crossed this floor 10,000 times and stopped seeing it somewhere around the third decade. She took me to the second floor. Not the guest wing. I had braced for the guest wing, for the polite distance of it, for the message it would send. Not the servants' quarters. A room at the south end of the corridor, facing the garden, with 2 tall windows and a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. I stood in the doorway and looked at the desk. Paper. Ink. A household ledger, new, its spine uncracked, sitting in the center of the blotter with the particular patience of an object that has been placed there deliberately. I crossed to it. I opened the cover. The note was written in a hand I did not recognize. Precise, economical, the handwriting of someone who has learned to say exactly what is necessary and nothing more. The estate has not had competent management in 40 years. Mrs. Harrow has been doing the work of 3 people. She will not ask for help. I am asking on her behalf. I read it twice. I looked at the desk. I looked at the blank ledger. I looked at the window, at the November garden below, dormant, geometric, the bones of something that had once been carefully maintained and was now simply enduring. Then I looked at Mrs. Harrow, who was standing in the doorway with her hands folded and an expression that communicated, with 40 years of professional precision, that she had been waiting for exactly this and intended to make full use of it. "Can you do accounts?" she said. "I managed my father's household for 6 years. The pewter eyes assessed this." "Good," she said. "Mine are a disaster." She turned to leave. She stopped, one hand on the doorframe, not turning back. "The tea is at 4. He does not drink it." A pause. "I make it anyway. You may do as you please with that information." She walked out. I sat down at the desk. I opened the ledger to the first page. I picked up the pen, and for the first time in 6 years, my hands did not feel like something I was managing. The days settled into a rhythm I recognized, the rhythm of a household that needs running, which is to say, constant. The ledger filled. Accounts first, because the accounts were the bones of everything else. 3 years of entries in 4 different hands, none of them consistent. 2 of them apparently guessing at figures they had not bothered to verify. Elara worked backward from the most recent quarter, cross-referencing against the supplier invoices Mrs. Harrow produced from a box under the kitchen desk, with the expression of a woman surrendering evidence. Staff schedules next. Then the correspondence, which had accumulated in a manner that suggested someone had been opening letters, feeling briefly overwhelmed, and placing them face down in a pile for a later that never arrived. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. At her father's house, it had been invisible work. The kind of work that only became visible when it stopped. The kind of work that earned no comment because comment would have required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would have required her father to revise an arithmetic he had already completed. Here, Mrs. Harrow noticed. You reorganized the wine cellar inventory, Mrs. Harrow said one morning, setting a cup of tea on the corner of the desk without being asked. The tea was at exactly the right temperature. It was always at exactly the right temperature. It was incorrectly catalogued. It has been incorrectly catalogued for 30 years. Mrs. Harrow's voice was dry as chalk. I mentioned it to him twice a decade. He nodded. He did nothing. She paused. You did it in an afternoon. The pause that followed was not empty. It was the specific pause of a woman revising an assessment upward and making sure the subject understood the revision was happening. Elara looked at her tea. She did not say. At my father's house, no one would have noticed. She did not say, I have been doing invisible work since I was 17, and I had forgotten it could be seen. She said nothing, because some things are too large and too fragile to say out loud to someone you have known for 11 days. But she felt it. She felt it the way you feel the first warm day after a winter that went on too long. Not with joy, not yet, but with the careful, disbelieving recognition that the cold might actually be ending. Soren did not comment on the wine cellar. He did not comment on the accounts or the correspondence or the staff schedule she had restructured to stop the overlap between the kitchen and the groundskeeping rotations that had been causing quiet, simmering resentment for what Mrs. Harrow confirmed was at least a decade, possibly longer. I stopped asking. He was present in the estate the way weather is present, felt before seen, the temperature dropping slightly in whatever corridor he occupied, the ambient cold of a vampire who has stopped noticing his own weather, the shadows thickening at the edges of rooms he passed through. She heard him sometimes, late, when the house was quiet, the soundless movement that was somehow still perceptible, the way you perceive the vampire king not through noise but through the sudden, certain knowledge that the air has changed its allegiance. But the documents she left on his desk were read. She knew because of the margins. Brief notes, precise, the same economical handwriting from the ledger's cover. The quarterly projection assumes stable wheat prices. Adjust for the November frost. She adjusted. She left the revised projection. The next morning, in the margin, in that same spare hand, good. One word. She sat with it for longer than was reasonable. Lady Portia Graves arrived on a Tuesday, unannounced, with flowers. Elara heard the carriage from the study, the crunch of gravel, the particular authority of wheels that belong to a vehicle whose owner expects to be received. She did not go to the window. She kept her pen moving across the quarterly correspondence, finishing the sentence she was on, because she had learned a long time ago that the world does not pause its demands simply because something alarming is happening in the driveway. She heard Mrs. Harrow's footsteps in the entrance hall. She heard a voice she did not recognize. Warm, musical, carrying the specific, practiced brightness of a woman performing an entrance she has rehearsed. She heard Mrs. Harrow say, I will inform his lordship you are here, not welcome. Not how lovely, only the flat, professional courtesy of a woman who has 40 years of practice at communicating disapproval through the precise selection of which words to omit. Elara finished the letter. She blotted it. She picked up the ledger and walked into the corridor. She saw her through the drawing-room doorway. Lady Portia Graves was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful. Not accidentally, not carelessly, but with the specific, maintained precision of someone who understands that beauty is a tool and treats it accordingly. She was dressed in deep green, perfectly fitted, with her dark hair arranged in a style that managed to look both effortless and expensive. She had set her flowers on the table, white lilies, a full arrangement, wrapped in paper that still had the florist's ribbon on it, and she was transferring them, stem by stem, into the vase that sat on the drawing-room table, the vase that Elara had arranged that morning. Copper beech branches and the last of the autumn rose hips, because there was nothing else in the garden in November, and she had thought the red against the dark wood of the room looked like something worth looking at. Lady Portia removed them with the calm, unhurried certainty of a woman who assumes that her version of things is naturally superior. She did not look at what she was replacing. She simply replaced it, the way you replace something inadequate without requiring it to be a statement. Elara's hand tightened on the ledger's spine. She walked past the doorway without entering. Mrs. Harrow fell into step beside her from the direction of the kitchen, appearing with the silent efficiency of a woman who has been managing this house long enough to know where to be before she is needed. "She brought lilies," Mrs. Harrow said. Her voice was perfectly level. "In November." A pause. "I detest lilies." Elara almost smiled. Almost. Because Lady Portia was still in the drawing room, and the flowers Elara had arranged were in her hands. And somewhere in the east wing, the temperature had just dropped 2 degrees in a corridor that Elara had not yet learned to navigate. And she did not know, yet, whether Soren Vane had been told his visitor's name, or whether he already knew it, or whether the note in the ledger that said, "Good," in that spare, precise hand meant anything at all against a woman who had arrived with flowers and a menu plan and the particular composure of someone who had not come to visit. She had come to stay. Lady Portia did not move from the doorway. She stood there for 3 full seconds. Elara counted them, the clerk's instinct, the habit of precision. And in those 3 seconds, the warm, musical composure held perfectly. The smile, the posture, the practiced ease of a woman who has prepared for every contingency. Then she made her mistake. She stepped into the room. "My dear," she said, and her voice was warm, and her voice was kind, and her voice was the voice of a woman who has decided that the correct response to finding her opponent wounded is to press the wound. "You mustn't distress yourself." She moved toward the desk with the unhurried grace of a woman crossing territory she has already claimed. "These arrangements, marriages of convenience, of necessity, they are difficult. I understand that. But you must see that what he requires nothing from you." The voice came from the corridor, not loud, not raised. The voice of a man who has not needed volume in 5 centuries because the cold carries further than sound, and the cold was already in the room, already moving through it, already arriving the way it always arrived, ahead of him, like intention, like weather, like something that had always been going to happen, and the room had simply not known it yet. Soren Vane stepped into the study doorway. He was still. The absolute, unaccidental stillness of something that has chosen, in this moment, to be entirely visible. The amber eyes moved once, to Elara, at the desk, her palms flat against the wood, the physician's report in front of her, and the evidence of tears she had not yet finished. And something in his face did what faces do when they see a thing they were not prepared to see and cannot look away from. Not pity, not the careful, managed sympathy of a man performing concern. Something older than that. Something that had no performance in it at all. Then the amber eyes moved to Lady Portia. They went flat. Not cold. Colder than cold. The specific, controlled stillness of something very old that has assessed a situation and found it beneath contempt and has decided, visibly, deliberately, with the patience of a man who has outlived every doubt he ever had, that the time for patience is finished. Lady Portia turned. Her composure held. Of course it held. She had built it over years, the same way you build anything meant to withstand pressure, and she was not a woman who broke easily or publicly. But her hands moved. A small thing, barely visible. The fingers of her right hand found the fabric of her skirt and pressed against it, once the involuntary gesture of a woman whose body has understood something her face has not yet admitted. Soren. Her voice was warm, still musical. The voice of a woman playing her last card with the grace of someone who has decided that grace is the only thing left worth playing. I only meant to say, I know what you meant. 2 words. The same temperature as the room. The same temperature as 5 centuries of watching things that were supposed to continue and did not. Of outliving every air and every line and every calculation that reduced a person to their function and found them wanting. You came here, he said, with a menu plan and a succession argument and the specific patience of a woman who has decided that what she is offering is what I require. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The shadows at the edges of the room had thickened. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the way that shadows thicken in this house when the air has changed its allegiance and the room has taken a side. You were wrong. Lady Portia's chin lifted. The composure held. The smile was gone now. Not broken, simply set aside. The way you set aside a tool that has stopped being useful. And what was underneath it was not ugly and was not cruel. It was simply the face of a woman who has run out of moves and knows it, and is deciding how to lose. She chose to lose with her spine straight. She cannot give you an air, Lady Portia said. Quiet. Factual. The last argument, made plainly, without the warmth and without the music, because she was done performing, and this was what remained. Whatever you feel, whatever this is, the estate requires. The estate, Soren said, requires management. He looked at Elara. Only at Elara. The amber eyes on her face. On the tears she had not finished. On the hands pressed flat against the desk. On the physician's report, and his 7 words in dark ink, and the 6 years of careful, necessary stillness that had brought her to this room and this morning and this moment. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in her father's drawing room, across the gray dress and the mended cuff, and the word that had lived in the air like furniture no one bothered to move, as though she were the only fixed point in the room. As though she had always been the only fixed point in the room. It has management, he said. The words were quiet. They were not for Lady Portia. They were not a declaration or a performance or a statement made for the benefit of anyone who might be listening. They were the flat, certain weight of a thing said by someone who has not been wrong about a thing in several centuries and does not intend to begin now. Lady Portia's hands released the fabric of her skirt. She looked at Elara. One long look. The look of a woman revising a final assessment. And what was in it was not hatred and was not contempt. It was something closer to recognition. The look of a woman who has just seen, clearly and without the interference of strategy, what she had been competing with and why she had never had a chance. She turned. She walked to the door. She stopped, one hand on the frame, not turning back, the same posture as Mrs. Harrow on the first morning, the same door frame, a different woman. And she said, to the corridor, to no one in particular, "I will have my things collected." Her footsteps were light and purposeful, and entirely without performance as they moved away down the corridor. The sound of them diminished. The front door opened. The front door closed. The study was quiet. Elara's hands were still on the desk. She had not moved. She had stood through all of it. The warm voice and the last argument and the amber eyes and the shadows thickening at the edges of the room, so, with her palms flat against the wood, and the physician's report in front of her, and the tea steaming quietly at the edge of her vision. And she had not moved, because she had not known what moving would mean. And she had learned a long time ago that stillness was the safest response to rooms she did not yet understand. She heard him cross the floor, no sound. She heard him anyway. The way you hear the vampire king, not through noise but through the certain ancient knowledge that the air has changed its allegiance and the cold has arrived and the room has taken a side. He stopped beside the desk. Not in front of her. Beside her. The amber eyes on the physician's report, on her father's letter, on the 7 words in dark ink that had been waiting on this desk for her to find them. Value is not the word. He did not touch the document. He did not explain it. He had written it without revision and without hesitation, and he did not revise it now. "I should have told you," he said, "that I had read it, that I knew before I came." A pause. The pause of a man who has chosen precision over everything and is choosing it again, now, in front of her, with the specific difficulty of someone who has outlived every person he has ever said a true thing to. "I did not know how to tell you without it sounding like—" He stopped. "Like a transaction," Elara said. Her voice was steady. 6 years of practice. The hands on the desk were not shaking. "Yes." She looked at the report. She looked at his 7 words. She looked at the tea at the edge of her vision. 2 cups, every morning, without asking. The small and daily evidence of a man who had read her father's arithmetic and found it insufficient and had been finding it insufficient, quietly, in margin notes and desk arrangements, and the placement of a ledger with the patience of an object left deliberately for weeks. She turned to look at him. The amber eyes were close. 3 feet. Less. The same distance as her father's drawing room. The same distance as the open hand and the palm-up gesture of a choice offered and not a command issued. And the eyes were the same. Burning. Present. Ancient. Furious in the way that only very controlled things are furious. The fury of something that has chosen precision over destruction and is making that choice again, right now, in front of her. "You knew," she said, "before the drawing room, before my father said the word." She held his gaze. She did not look away. "You knew and you came anyway, and you extended your hand and you said, 'I disagree,'" he said. Quietly. The same 2 words. The same temperature as the first time. Cold the way stone is cold, not aggressive, not unkind. Simply the temperature of something that has existed longer than warmth and has decided, in this particular November, to be warm anyway. Elara's eyes burned. She had cried once this morning. She had decided at 17 that crying changed nothing and cost everything, and she had stopped, and she had not started again in 6 years, and she had already broken that once today, and she found, standing at the desk with the physician's report, and the 7 words and the amber eyes 3 feet from her face, that she did not have the energy to hold the composure in play any longer. She did not cry, but she stopped holding it. Her shoulders dropped. One breath. The specific, involuntary exhale of a woman who has been braced for impact for 6 years and has just been told, by the evidence of everything around her, that the impact is not coming, that the impact was never coming, that the thing she had been bracing against was her father's arithmetic and not the world, her father's ledger and not her worth, her father's word and not the word. The word was something else. She was beginning to have a name for it. "Mrs. Harrow makes 2 cups," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "Every morning. She made the second one before she knew I was coming downstairs." "She knew," Soren said. "She has been managing this house for 40 years. She knows everything." "She told me you said—" Elara stopped. She looked at the report. She looked at his handwriting. "I am not purchasing livestock." The amber eyes did not move from her face. "No," he said. "I am not." The word sat in the room between them. Not damaged, not value, not heir or succession or goods or any of the words that had been applied to her in rooms where she was discussed and not consulted, present and uncounted, reduced by arithmetic to the sum of what she could not give. A different word. A word she was still learning the shape of. A word that felt like copper beech branches and the last of the autumn rosehips arranged in a vase, because there was nothing else in the garden in November, and someone had thought the red against the dark wood looked like something worth looking at. She lifted her hand from the desk. It was shaking. 6 years of training, and it shook anyway. The deep, involuntary shake of something that has been held rigid for a very long time and has just been asked to reach toward something it had stopped believing it was allowed to reach toward. He extended his hand, palm up, open. The same gesture as the drawing room. A choice offered, not a command issued. Patient. Certain. The certainty of something that has outlived every doubt it ever had and is not, in this moment, doubting. She placed her hand in his. His hand was cold, steady, and this time she did not wait for the cold to become warmth, because she had learned, in the weeks since November, that the cold was not the absence of warmth. It was simply a different temperature. It was simply what he was. And what he was had read her father's letter and written 7 words in dark ink and left them on a desk positioned to catch the morning light, and had come to her father's drawing room in the absolute, uncomplicating black of something that does not require the room's approval, and had said, "I disagree," in a voice that carried the way cold carries, through walls, through composure, through 6 years of careful and necessary stillness. She held his hand. The study was quiet. The tea was cooling at the edge of the desk. The physician's report was in front of them both, her father's letter and his annotation on the same paper, in the same light. And the annotation was 7 words, and the letter was a life reduced to arithmetic, and the 7 words had won. Value is not the word. Mrs. Harrow was in the entrance hall when they came downstairs. She was standing with her hands folded, and her iron-gray hair, and her pewter eyes, and she looked at them, at the joined hands, at Elara's face, at the amber eyes that were not flat, and were not burning, but were simply, quietly present, with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this for 40 years and intends to make no comment about it whatsoever. She turned toward the kitchen. She stopped, one hand on the doorframe. "The lilies," she said, to the corridor, to no one in particular, "have been removed." A pause. "I have put the rose hips back." She walked into the kitchen, the door closed, soft behind her. The November garden was dormant and geometric, and entirely itself in the pale morning light. The bones of something carefully maintained, the structure of something that had been enduring for a very long time, and was, perhaps, beginning to do something other than endure. The east garden wall caught the sun at this hour. It would need repointing before spring. Elara had 3 contractor estimates in the maintenance ledger, cross-referenced against the quarterly budget, with a recommendation noted in the margin in her own handwriting. She had not needed to be asked. She had simply seen what needed doing and done it, the way she had always done it. In her father's house, invisibly. In the gray dress mended at the cuff with thread that almost matched. In the room at the far end of the table. In the 6 years of careful and necessary work that had earned no comment, because comment would have required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would have required her father to revise an arithmetic he had already completed. Here, the work was visible. Here, the margins wrote back. She stood at the study window with the morning light on her face, and the ledger open on the desk behind her, and the tea cooling at the edge of the blotter. And she looked at the garden, at the dormant beds, and the geometric paths, and the east wall that would need repointing, and the bare branches of the copper beech that would, in spring, be something worth looking at. And she felt it. Not joy. Not yet. Something quieter than joy and more durable. The specific, careful warmth of a woman who has been told, in 7 words and 2 cups of tea and an open hand in a drawing room in November, that the word her father used was never the word, that the arithmetic was never the truth, that the body called broken was not broken, that the daughter sold as damaged goods was not goods, and was not damaged and was not, had never been, the sum of what she could not give. She was the composure that held while her father sold her. She was the hands that shook when someone finally saw her. She was the ledger filled, and the accounts reconstructed, and the wine cellar reorganized in an afternoon, and the copper beech branches in the vase because the red against the dark wood looked like something worth looking at. She was, it turned out, exactly enough. She had always been exactly enough. The November light came through the glass. The garden waited below. The ledger was open on the desk, and the pen was where she had left it. And there was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 6 years, her hands did not feel like something she was managing. They felt like hers. Your worth was never located in what you could produce. It was located in the composure that held when someone tried to reduce you to a price, and in the hands that finally shook when someone refused to. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe. There are more waiting for you. And tell me in the comments, what word would you have written in the margin?